All right, let's dive into this deep dive on the science of self-talk. You sent over this YouTube video, right, with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he's this neuroscientist who claims we can rewire our brains just by using self-talk. I don't know about like bending spoons with my mind or anything like that, but I am curious. What do you think?
Well, it's interesting, because he goes way beyond just your typical positive thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's blending neuroscience with physics, even quantum mechanics, to
Mm-hmm.
explain how our thoughts can actually, like, impact our bodies, even reality. It's a pretty big claim.
It is a pretty big claim. So maybe let's just start with like the basics. How does our self-talk, like how does it even influence our brains in the first place?
Well, think of it this way. Every time you have a thought, your brain releases these chemicals. They're called neurotransmitters,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like messengers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they help your neurons. Your brain cells talk to each other. And so the more you repeat a thought, the stronger those connections get. And Dr. Dispenza, he calls this like building your neural architecture.
Ah, so it's like if you're building a pathway in the woods, the more you walk down that path, the more defined it becomes.
Exactly. And here's the thing. He says that like 90% of our thoughts today are the same ones we had yesterday. So if you're like constantly thinking negative thoughts, you're just like reinforcing those same pathways.
Okay, well, that's kind of unsettling. I mean, we all have days where we're just like our own worst critics.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact does that actually have on us? Like physically, emotionally, what happens?
Well, imagine you're constantly telling yourself, ugh, I'm not good enough, or I'm going to fail.
Hmm.
Your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what you're imagining, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to react as if there's like a real threat. And it's going to flood your body with all these stress hormones like cortisol.
So it's not just about feeling bad. It's an actual like physical response happening in our bodies.
Absolutely. And those stress hormones can really like wreak havoc on your body over time.
Yeah.
Dr. Dispenza, he highlights how chronic stress can like weaken your immune system, mess with your digestion. It can even impact your sleep.
Oh, wow. So those negative thoughts aren't just harmless chatter, they're actually impacting our health.
Right, and it's not even just physical. Those negative thought patterns can become like self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yeah.
If you believe you're going to fail, well, you're less likely to take risks or put in the effort.
In sense. But if our brains are already wired for these like negative patterns, is there any hope? Can we actually rewire them for the better? How does that work?
That's where this really cool concept of neuroplasticity comes in.
Okay, neuroplasticity. I've heard that term, but can you break it down for me?
Sure. So neuroplasticity is basically your brain's ability to change and adapt, throughout our lives. It basically means we're not stuck with the brain we were born with, right? We can actually rewire our brains by forming new neural connections.
So our brains are like always under construction.
Exactly. And Dr. Dispenza thinks that focused self-talk can be a really powerful tool for rewiring our brains, like for the better. He even claims that it can be more effective than some medications, for creating lasting change. He mentions a study where participants repeated a positive phrase for just like 21 minutes a day for 8 weeks. And they saw some pretty interesting results.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about that study. What kind of changes did they see?
Well, they found that the participants had an increase in gray matter in their hippocampus, which is like the part of the brain that handles learning and memory, right? But then at the same time, their amygdala, which is like the fear and stress center, actually shrunk.
Wow. So just repeating a positive phrase can actually change the physical structure of our brains.
Yeah, that's what the research is showing. It's crazy to think that we actually have this power to like reshape our brains just with our thoughts.
It is pretty amazing. But how does that actually work? I mean, I get the neural pathway thing, but is there something more to it? Because Dr. Dispenza starts talking about quantum physics and energy field, and
Yeah.
gonna get lost there.
It does get a little mind-bendy, I'll admit, but like the basic idea is that our thoughts aren't just these like abstract things in our heads. They create energy,
Right.
right? And that can actually impact the world around us. It's like dropping a pebble in a pond
Yeah, yeah.
and then watching the ripples spread out.
Okay. I'm intrigued, but I'm still a little skeptical. How do our thoughts create that ripple effect?
Well, quantum physics suggests that everything is made up of energy, even our thoughts,
Yeah.
and it's all vibrating at different frequencies.
So our thoughts are sending out these energetic signals.
Exactly. And those signals can interact with the like energy fields around us. So by changing our thoughts, we're actually changing our energy. And that can attract different experiences into our lives, different possibilities.
Whoa. So we're not just changing our brains, we're changing our energy, and that energy is influencing our reality.
That's the idea. And he connects this to another area of research called epigenetics. Have you heard of that?
I've heard the term, but I don't really know what it means.
So epigenetics is like the study of how our environment and our lifestyle choices can actually influence how our genes express themselves. It's like our genes have these little on and off switches, and our thoughts and beliefs can actually like flip those switches.
So even though we inherit our genes, we actually have some control over how those genes express themselves.
Exactly. And Dr. Dispenza says that positive self-talk can literally switch on genes that like promote health and well-being. And negative self-talk can activate genes that are associated with disease. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Okay, so we've established that self-talk is incredibly powerful, but how do we actually go about changing those like deeply ingrained negative thought patterns? I mean, it's not as simple as just like deciding to think positive, right?
You're right, it takes effort, it takes practice. And that's where his 3-day program comes in. So he breaks it down into these daily practices that are designed to like reprogram our subconscious minds and help us shift into a more positive and empowered state of being.
So day one is all about awareness.
Exactly. He suggests we start by just observing our thoughts, without judgment. Think of it like turning on the subtitles for your thoughts.
Right.
You might be surprised at what you discover.
I bet. What about the rest of the day? How do we handle those negative thoughts that inevitably pop up when we're just, living our lives?
Well, he calls it the catch and replace technique. So it's about becoming aware of those negative thoughts as they're happening and consciously choosing a different response.
So instead of beating ourselves up for having a negative thought, we just acknowledge it and then choose to focus on something more empowering.
That's it. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Dispenza's program gets even more interesting when we move into days 2 and 3, because that's when he starts introducing techniques for actively like reprogramming our subconscious minds.
Okay, well, before we dive into those advanced techniques, I think we need to take a minute to let all of this sink in.
It is a lot to process, but ultimately I think it's about understanding that we have more control over our thoughts and even our reality than we might think.
It is pretty empowering stuff, but I have a feeling this is just the beginning of our deep dive. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore Dr. Dispenza's techniques for rewiring our brains and stepping into a new reality.
All right, so last time we were talking about how our self-talk really shapes our brains and even like our reality. And now I think we're ready to dive into Dr. Dispenza's 3-day program, like how do we actually rewire our minds?
Yeah, he breaks it down into 3 distinct days, each one focused on a different aspect of, changing our self-talk.
So day 1 was about awareness. What about day 2? What do we do on day 2? Day 2 is all about reprogramming our subconscious.
Okay.
So like replacing those old negative thoughts with empowering statements that actually reflect the person we want to become. He calls them power statements.
Power statements. Okay, that sounds kind of intense. So what exactly are they? Like, how do you even make one?
Basically, they're like declarations.
Yeah.
And they combine intention with emotion, right? So he suggests using this formula, you start by saying, I am becoming someone who, and then you add 3 specific qualities or ways of being that you want to cultivate.
So, for example, someone might say, I am becoming someone who is confident, courageous, and kind, like that.
Exactly. And the key is, it's not just saying the words, right? You have to really feel them, like in your body. He emphasizes that, embodying those qualities as you speak the words.
So it's not just positive thinking, it's about aligning like our thoughts and feelings and actions.
Yeah, exactly. And on day 2, he also brings in this other technique. He calls them power poses.
Okay, power poses, I've heard of those. That's
Yeah.
the whole like, standing like Wonder Woman thing, right?
Yeah. Basically using your body language to like shift your internal state. And research shows that standing in a powerful posture, even for a few minutes, can change your hormone levels. And you actually feel more confident, more in control.
So it's like you're sending a message to your brain like, hey, I'm powerful, I'm capable.
Exactly. And when you combine power poses with your spoken declarations, that creates like a really powerful neural imprint.
So it's a double whammy, hitting the subconscious with everything we've got. What other techniques does he use on day 2?
Well, he also encourages us to practice what he calls walking declarations. And so basically you synchronize your words with your steps. It's like creating a multisensory experience that makes those positive statements just way more impactful and memorable,
So you're turning your walk into a moving meditation. You're
Right.
repeating your power statements with each step.
Exactly. And it's surprisingly effective because the rhythm of walking just helps anchor those statements in your subconscious mind.
Makes sense. And didn't he also talk about state-dependent speaking?
Yes.
What was that again?
So that's about being aware of your emotional state before you speak, like especially before important conversations. So he suggests taking a moment to generate feelings of gratitude or appreciation before going into those situations.
So it's like intentionally shifting into a more positive state before you interact with people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because our energy is contagious, right? So when we approach things from a place of positivity and empowerment, we're more likely to create positive outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so day 2 is all about reprogramming the subconscious. Power statements, power poses, walking declarations, state-dependent speaking. Sounds like a busy day. But are we ready for day 3?
Absolutely. This is where things get really interesting.
Go ahead.
Day 3 is about tapping into what he calls the quantum field of infinite possibilities.
Ooh,
It's
okay.
about moving beyond the limits of our current reality and tapping into the power of our future self.
Our future self. Okay, now you got me really curious. What does that even mean?
It means connecting with a version of ourselves who has already achieved those goals, embody the qualities we're striving for, right?
So it's like we're borrowing energy and wisdom from our future selves
Yeah,
to help us create that reality now.
exactly. And one of the techniques he uses for this is something called quantum speaking.
Quantum speaking. I have no idea what that is.
Basically, it's about consciously choosing to speak to ourselves and to others, from the perspective of our future selves.
So instead of saying, ugh, I'm really struggling with this, you would say, I'm learning and growing from this experience.
Exactly. It's about shifting our language and our perspective
Yeah,
to align with the reality we want to create.
that's really powerful. What other techniques does he have for day 3?
He also takes us through this visualization where we step into a bubble of light that represents our future selves.
Yeah.
And it's about embodying the energy of the person we want to become. So you really feel what it's like to already possess those qualities.
So it's not just thinking about it, it's about feeling it as if it's already real.
Exactly. And he explains that when we do this, we're actually sending a really powerful message to our subconscious mind and to the quantum field. This is the reality I'm choosing to create, right?
That's amazing. So day 3 is all about accessing that quantum field, connecting with our future selves, speaking and acting from that place of empowerment. Sounds incredible, but also kind of daunting. Is this something anyone can actually do?
He believes that, yeah.
Yeah.
We all have this ability to tap into that quantum field and shape our reality. It's not about being special or gifted or anything. It's just understanding the principles of quantum physics
Yes.
and applying them to our lives.
So it's like learning a new language, the language of quantum creation.
Exactly. And like with any language, it takes practice and consistency. But the rewards are immense.
They are incredible. Well, we've covered a lot in part 2, Dr. Dispenza's techniques for actually reprogramming our minds. But before we wrap up, what resonates with you the most from his whole program?
That's a good question. I think for me, what stands out is how much he emphasizes aligning our thoughts, feelings, and actions. It's not enough to just think positive thoughts. We actually have to embody them and act on them.
Yeah, it's like the saying, energy flows where attention goes.
Mhm.
So if we want to create a new reality, we have to put our energy and attention there.
Exactly. And he gives us all these tools to help us do that.
That's awesome. Well, we've covered a lot in part 2, exploring all those techniques, but we're not done yet. Join us for part 3, where we're going to go even deeper. We'll delve into his tips for actually making those changes last and how to actually live a life transformed by self-talk. Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive into self-talk. And we've explored how our thoughts can shape our reality. We even learned some techniques for rewiring our brains, for the better. But now I'm kind of curious, what happens after those first 3 days? How do we make these changes actually stick?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? How do we integrate this into our lives? Well, Dr. Dispenza, he acknowledges that those 3 days are just the start. It's a jumping off point. And he actually offers a lot of practical advice for making these changes last and really living a life transformed by self-talk.
Okay, so it's not like we just do this 3-day thing and then boom, we're done.
Not quite. No, it takes, ongoing effort. It's a commitment. He compares it to building a muscle. You had to keep exercising those neural pathways, to make them stronger.
Okay, so what are some of his tips for making this part of our daily routine? I'm all about practical advice.
Well, he suggests starting by creating what he calls anchor spots. And these are like dedicated spaces in your environment for your practices.
Okay.
So it could be like a quiet corner where you meditate, or a spot in front of the mirror where you do your power poses, or even like a specific route that you walk for those walking declarations.
Ah, so it's like visual cues to remind us to do the work?
Exactly. He also suggests writing your power statements on sticky notes and putting them like all over the place, on the bathroom mirror, the fridge, your computer screen,
I like that.
anywhere they'll serve as a reminder.
Yeah, surround yourself with them. What about the quantum stuff? Does he say to keep doing that too?
Oh, yeah, definitely. He says to keep practicing quantum speaking. Remember, that's where you talk to yourself and to others from the perspective of your future self. And to keep doing those visualizations, where you connect with your future self and step into that bubble of light.
So you're basically carrying that energy with you everywhere you go.
Exactly. And he talks about managing your energy like a quantum bank account. So before you do, like any demanding task, you make a deposit into your account, through meditation or doing like heart coherence practices, or even just speaking your power statements.
I remember that analogy from before. It's great. So you're making sure you have enough energy to handle those challenges.
Yeah,
Right.
without totally depleting yourself.
Okay, and what happens when we slip up? Because we all do, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. He really emphasizes being kind to ourselves when we fall back into those old patterns. Because, transformation isn't linear. There are going to be ups and downs.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. So he says, like, when you notice yourself slipping up, just acknowledge it. Just say, okay, change noted, and then just gently redirect yourself back to the practices.
Be your own cheerleader.
Yeah. And one last thing he really stresses is finding a community.
Yeah.
People who are on a similar path, who support your transformation. Because that creates like a field of resonance, like a shared energy that amplifies everyone's efforts.
It's like we're all in this together.
Exactly. And that's super powerful.
It really is. Well, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from like the neuroscience of self-talk to quantum physics and everything in between. But it really comes down to this simple but profound idea that our thoughts create our reality.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And we have the power to choose those thoughts and rewire our brains and really step into like a life that reflects our highest potential.
100%.
It's an incredibly empowering message. So as we wrap up this deep dive, if you could choose one empowering statement to guide you today, what would it be? What future self are you like calling in?
That's a great question. I think I'm going to have to sit with that one for a minute.
Me too. And to you, dear listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked something within you. Remember, you have the power to change your thoughts. And when you do that, you can change your world.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep those empowering statements flowing. Keep your heart open and keep reaching for those stars.